Welcome to Detroit Lions News. I'm your host, Joe Chap, and obviously, we're just going to get into it. Between the Whistles Detroit YouTube page, subscribe. You'll get the latest Lions content. So, if you were kind of, not looking at Facebook earlier, we had some stuff posted on Detroit Lions News. And one of the things we had posted was that John Kaminsky, Alex Anzalone, and Isaiah Buggs are willing to take less money to kind of fit into the cap of what Brad Holmes is trying to build. Brad Holmes wants to go after some key players, and there's a couple guys that he can go after, but he wants the cap to be relatively in flex so that they can move forward. And especially when you look at the cap space next year, they have a lot of room to do that. So that is a good thing. Then you heard that Ben Johnson was staying in Detroit. Ben Johnson, he was a front runner for the Carolina Panthers head coaching job. And listen, you could sit here and you could tell me that maybe he didn't get it and he just didn't, he didn't get it. And so he's coming back. But this is a big win for the Detroit Lions. And when you talk about continuity in the offensive realm, when you talk about continuity with Jared Goff and his offensive coordinator, that is absolutely huge. I think the one thing that really sets this thing apart, though, is Dan Campbell. Um, a lot of people don't know, but Dan Campbell, when everything was happening with is Ben Johnson going to get the offensive court, or is he going to get a head coaching job with the Panthers, with the Colts, with the Cardinals? Uh, Dan Campbell was at work and he was looking at people on his staff who could potentially be the OC and who would fit into that role. And obviously, there's some guys that you would sit there and you go, okay, this guy can Tanner Ingstrand, or maybe a guy like Deuce Staley, or Antoine Randall, or Mark Brunell. There's a ton of guys on that's the offensive staff that can fit into that role. So at that point, you kind of were like, okay, they're kind of they're kind of preparing for Ben Johnson to take over and go get his head coaching job, and I think that was the what we all thought. And then this news drops from Tom Pelissero that Ben Johnson wants to come back because they're building something special in Detroit, and it just brought me back because if you have been a Lions fan for however long you've been a Lions fan, you've seen regimes look good on surface, but they weren't. For example, the Jim Caldwell, Martin Mayhew, Bob Quinn era. I mean, there was points in time where they looked really good, and it looked like it was actually going to be something that you can lean on. But there wasn't any long term sustainability. Bob Quinn wasn't a great drafter. He drafted guys like Frank Ragnow, Taylor Decker. Obviously, we're going to thank him for that. But when you look at the way he drafted in the for the second to the seventh round, there wasn't many picks that he really made great headway on. Same with Martin Mayhew. Martin Mayhew, you got Sue there, Stafford there, Nick Fairley there, but the problem was the picks in second through seventh round. That's where you build your team. A lot of people think that you build your team through first round draft picks and second round draft picks and third round draft picks. The reality is the third through seventh round are the most important for a franchise because if you can get that steal the draft, you like Brad Holmes has done back to back years. I mean, look at last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown. This year he's got Malcolm Rodriguez. He's got James Houston. Brad Holmes can draft, and I think what you see with Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes is they work in unison together, and these guys really are putting together a really good organization that is actually has some substance and has some long term sustainability. And I was talking to someone who, he's a big Pittsburgh Steelers guy. He's followed that organization for close to 40 years. And one thing he said when he went to that Steelers Lions preseason game is he said, "I think you guys got the next Chuck Noll." And I think if you know football, Chuck Noll is the guy who started the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty. And the one thing that he said, he's an older guy, so he goes out to these older kind of comparisons. But Chuck Noll is a great guy to kind of compare to, because if you look at the Detroit Lions and you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers before Chuck Noll got there, they are dead set on each other. They're the same kind of. They were the same way. Both were losing organizations down in the dumps. It was basically a tear down and rebuild all in one. And what you see with what you're seeing with Dan Campbell is his ability to work with his coordinators. One of the things that you hear from people is that Dan Campbell, when he's working with his guys, they all say the same thing. He's easy to work with. He takes their opinions into account. When you had the last regime you had with Matt Patricia, he did not do that. And I think what you build your organization on is just being a guy who could, that translates to the people. Head coaches, they're not really they'll never be as good as they can be if they don't relate to the players, if they don't relate to their coaches, and that's what makes this thing work. And Dan Campbell, the way he's came in, the way he's built that coaching staff, there's so many smart minds on that coaching staff. The guy who I was talking about, the Pittsburgh Steelers guy who's he's been following that organization because he's done a lot of stuff from magazines to podcasts and all that stuff. He literally said it. There's probably 6 or 7 guys on the Detroit Lions coaching staff that could be potential head coaches in the future. Not right now, but in the future. And when you got a guy like Ben Johnson, when you got a guy like Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, and then you got all these coaches like Calvin Shepard, Deuce Staley, Mark Brunell, you're building something special, and it's not just short term. This isn't a short term where if you do this right, you'll move on and you'll maybe have a window of like 2 to 3 years where it's good. You're looking at long term sustainability. I think you're looking at a team that's going to compete for a while because Dan Campbell has shown that he's willing to adapt. He's willing to talk to these guys. He's willing to be a man. He's a leader of men. And if you're a Lions fan, you should be really happy about that because with Matt Patricia, you didn't get that. And this Dan Campbell guy, everyone wanted at the beginning of the year, people wanted him fired because of the 1-6 start. But to pull out of that and go 8-2 down the stretch is literally what that guy is capable of. And if you could pull a team out of a 1-6 start and go 8-2, you are a special head coach because you can pull them out of dark times. And that's what Brad Holmes said. And this guy, Dan Campbell, he's an elite guy. He is an elite leader of men. And the players love playing for him. And you can see that every time they play. So if you're a Lions fan, you should be happy. And if you're a Lions fan, you should also be expecting to compete long term in Detroit. And listen, subscribe here to the Detroit Between the Whistles Detroit. We're gonna have Detroit Lions videos all the time, Detroit Red Wings videos, Tiger videos, Pistons videos, whatever. Stay tuned. We're for our next video. We're gonna have a mock off season. It's gonna be great, and we'll see you in the next show.